Welcome to Keto Life Support, where we make your keto life sustainable, fun, and low stress. I'm Kim Howerton, and I'll be coming to you weekly with some of my keto besties to bring you the practical, real-world keto advice that you need. Quick disclaimer, I am not a doctor, and even if we do have a doctor in the house from time to time, he or she is not your doctor, and nothing we say on this show should be taken as medical advice. Always check in with a trusted medical professional about your own personal medical concerns.
Hello and welcome to Keto Life Support. This is Kim Howerton. And on today's episode number 90, we're going to talk about deprivation versus restriction. Let's get into it. So one of the things that I think a lot of us, certainly those of us that were overeaters, maybe considered ourselves a little bit of hedonists, really into the food thing. One thing we would often say might be like, I don't ever want to feel deprived. I don't deprive myself. And I even remember, if you listen to my episode with Lisa Brownstein about a friend of hers who passed away, talking about not wanting to feel deprived of their favorite foods. And her point in that episode was then that friend got deprived of her life. Wow, I'm starting off nice and heavy, aren't I? But, it's this thought about what does deprivation really mean? We talk about wanting to include all our favorite things. We don't want to feel deprived. But I don't know if we use the word right, is what I've been thinking about. By the way, has anyone noticed? I just sort of talk on some of these episodes about things I'm thinking about. I hope that works for you. Yeah, so you're like my little journal. It's like my confessional. Anyway. But this idea that we want to live this undeprived life. We never want to feel deprived. We always want to feel abundant and like we can have whatever we want. But the reality is we don't live that way. Like in anything, right? Maybe love, but even a wealthy person could still feel deprived of a life that they maybe, they can afford a vacation to Fiji, but they can't, move to Fiji and have a private plane and yada, yada, right? There's always some limits in our life. And so we talk about every time we impose a limit, a restriction, there's this fear of feeling deprived. I'm really trying not to say depraved accidentally, but you know what I mean, deprived, like that something is being kept from us, that we're being limited in a way that is like we're in chains. But life is full of boundaries, and sometimes those boundaries are actually what show us how to optimize. Jocko Willing says, what does he say? I always say it wrong, so I'm going to try to say it right. Discipline equals freedom. The reason I say it wrong is what I actually hear when he says that is boundaries equals freedom. Because there's this way that I think, well, what is discipline? Discipline is the ability to maintain your boundaries, right? You tell yourself what you're going to do, and then you have the discipline to follow through and do it. But if you didn't ever create that boundary, discipline doesn't mean anything, because discipline has to be properly applied for it to be discipline. So my version is boundaries create freedom, because when we know our boundaries, we can operate in the best possible way within them. And if your boundaries don't feel good and you can't find a way to make them work for you, that's then an opportunity to question your boundary. Because if you can do that from a thoughtful, realistic, connected, intentional way, then you're always welcome to redefine a boundary, right? Like in a relationship, you set boundaries about how you're going to treat each other, how you're going to act, what's going to be acceptable, what's going to be unacceptable. And, you're always welcome within that relationship to redefine those boundaries. And that's how you have a healthy relationship, right? It could be the little things, like your partner hates washing the dishes and you don't really mind, so you always wash the dishes. You've created an agreement that you'll be the one to wash the dishes. And that makes you both happy and it works for you both. And it's one of the boundaries that you guys have set. Or it really bothers them when you don't take out the garbage and it's not such a big deal to you, but you know it really bothers them. So you do it because it makes life better. We create structure, rules, boundaries, habits. Like we create a life around us. And our life is created by our boundaries, by our borders, by our restrictions. Life is better, not just because of what we include, but because of what we exclude. Maybe you have some friends that were like, they were super fun to party with, and you'd have a good time in the moment, but like ultimately your life wasn't as good with them in it because you constantly had a hangover and they were encouraging you to do things that were illegal. And I don't know, fill in the blank, right? So as we grow up, as we mature, as we come into a better version of ourselves, we create boundaries and restrictions that keep us on the path of a happier life. And somehow we got the message that food wasn't included, right? Like all of that makes total sense. Yeah, you stop hanging out with the like totally terrible people at some point in your life because you realize they're not good for you and your future. But somehow we didn't apply this rule to food, it feels like. This idea that we're supposed to live in Bingeapalooza, that is like a destination that is appropriate. And the reality is, when I look around at people who maintain great bodies, maintain great health, and, it is a judgment word, but bodies I admire, bodies that are strong and fit, lives that are happy and healthy, I have yet to meet one that doesn't apply restriction in those areas in some form. Now, that restriction might look like a lot of different things, but these people have figured out boundaries. Now, again, we also know people who can seemingly get away with a lot more than we can, but those are kind of outliers. They're pretty rare people. And if you actually dug into the nitty gritty, you'd find that maybe to be able to eat what looks like whatever they want, they do some other things to make that work for them. And it's beside the point. There are just some very genetically gifted people and good for them, but it's not me. So I can't live like them and have a good life. So say lovey. But almost every person with a physique, a health, an outlook, a personality, like anything I admire, they use restriction in some way. I'll bring up my dad. He is amazing. He is almost 80. He's in great health. He still goes to the gym multiple times a week. He goes for a walk every single day. He goes for bike rides. He's put work in, and he's not a natural athlete. He's not like, he doesn't love all of this. He doesn't hate it. It's just part of his routine. When I ask him why he does it, it's because he wanted to live a long and healthy life. That's why. And when he gains a pound or two, he monitors his weight. He gains a couple of pounds. He looks at what he's been eating. I think I've used this example before. Apologies that I'm redoubling my example, but it's a good example. He's like, okay, no glass of wine with dinner, or no bread with my salad, or like he'll remove something that he knows will help him get back into the weight range he's comfortable in. So in the entirety of my life, he's never had what anyone would call a weight problem or a problem with his body fat. And yet he was an overweight teenager, and he learned that applying some restriction at appropriate times was what worked for him. He doesn't live a ketogenic lifestyle. He doesn't live a low carb lifestyle, but he makes sure he moves his body in ways that keep him healthy. And he also makes sure that he eats in a way that keeps himself. And I use weight as an example, but it's not just weight. He gets blood work regularly. He checks on his numbers. He wants to be as fit and healthy as possible. And he never, ever wants to shop for bigger clothes. So, that is a great example of somebody that I look up to. Now, the methods I use to control my weight and my health and the details of those are different. And the details of many of my clients might be different. But I'm seeing that this restraint has been employed in people's lives when they end up getting results that are admirable. And so a lot of people talk about deprivation, and it feels like such a big deal. But it's really, to me, just a shift. So, restriction is the act of applying boundaries. Deprivation is an emotional interpretation of those boundaries. You feel deprived, like something's been taken away from you. And I just want to say that there are absolutely situations in which deprivation is the right word, but I don't think it's the right word for those of us who have health goals and are trying to live a healthy life. We are applying boundaries and we are restricting by choice. So it is well within all of our rights to eat as much as we want of anything we like at any time, including constantly. If that is living your best life, well, you're probably not listening to this podcast, but if that is your version of living your best life, that is what you should do. But then you accept the consequences of your actions. And for most of us who've decided to go through a lifestyle change, we've said, yeah, I don't like these consequences. I don't like these consequences at all. And I am willing to make changes to my behavior so that these consequences are not here. So I don't have to deal with these specific consequences. And that's why I wanted to put this out here. I feel like a lot of you already get this, but I think it's important to say these things in words because words are powerful. And we get maybe a hint or a feeling about something, but we don't put it into words. We can find that is elusive, and we might fall back into not wanting to feel deprived, right? We just went through the holiday season, at least at the time I'm recording this. And, I made choices in November and December to say, I'm not going to be on a cut right now. I'm not going to be trying to lose weight. I'm not trying to gain weight, but I'm not trying to lose weight. I'm going to expand the options in terms of how much food I eat or the types of food I eat that I don't normally include because that feels like a good choice to me right now and it would feel good. And I don't believe that I will have significantly negative repercussions because I didn't blow up my boundaries. I just shifted them out slightly. I still made the decision of where those boundaries would fall. And so for you listening to this, your boundaries may shift. They may look different at different times. But I want to rewrite the idea of deprivation, that deprivation is reserved as a word for when something is happening to you that is not in your control. Right? If you're imprisoned, you're being deprived of your freedom. And if you're imprisoned against your will, who isn't imprisoned against it? Anyway, that is a deprivation. But if you make choices, that's freedom. Making choices, even choices that feel somewhat restrictive, they give you your life. They define your parameters. They give you structure. And that structure can be the most freeing thing in our life because with structure, with boundaries, we can live within it in the best possible way. And when we ourselves get a chance to define the boundaries of how we live, that is the ultimate in freedom when you really think about it, that we get to decide. We get to decide our actions because we've evaluated the repercussions and we choose where to steer. Right? Where to point the rudder. And so I would like you to stop using the word deprived where it should not be applied. Now, you might not be saying it out loud, but sometimes you might be saying it in your head. The real word is freedom, boundaries, and yes, restriction, which is also it's like a borderline scary word, but all it means is that we've made a choice. We've made a choice within a certain parameter. We've set our boundaries. And once we have those boundaries set, it can be full steam ahead because we know where we're going. They can point in a direction. They can have a trajectory. So I wish you all the best in this post-holiday season, creating your appropriate boundaries for 2022 and beyond. And I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Keto Life Support. Want more information? Want show notes? Want to suggest a topic? Just head over to ketolifesupport.com. That's where all that kind of thing can go on. By the way, I have a request. If you could go to your podcast host and hit subscribe, we would really, really appreciate it. And what would be even more awesome is if you could write a review. And what would be even more awesome than that is if you could write like a really flattering review. Just asking, you do you. All right. So thanks so much for joining us. I'm thrilled that you're part of the Keto fam. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.